Hello. One of the biggest curses of the American workplace is this issue of multitasking. There's not a doubt in my mind that one of the reasons so many people respond to conference board surveys saying they are unhappy with their jobs is this whole thing about multitasking. It's a tremendous stressor on the American workforce. And we see bad examples of multitasking all the time in our daily lives. I read an article just the other day about a teenage boy who crashed into a farm animal on a country road, and it turned out that he was looking at his cell phone as he was driving. In other words, he was multitasking. And I couldn't help but wonder how the insurance company will respond to that claim. Will there come a time when insurance companies will no longer cover people who are texting and driving? Because texting and driving is multitasking. You're trying to do two things, incompatible things at once that you can't possibly do well. And that's why so many people get killed and injured. One major reason that so many people get killed and injured in traffic accidents in the United States is this issue of multitasking. Trying to pay attention to a phone and text at the same time that they're driving. I'll never forget one time back in college, walked into the college classroom, the professor walks in and he starts to hand out the exam papers. Nobody's ready for the exam because we weren't expecting it that day. And he was quickly informed that today wasn't supposed to be the test day, and he apologized. He said, "Oh, that's a consequence of multitasking, doing too many things at once." So he got the test dates all screwed up. You know, there are a lot of occupations in the United States, in spite of this obsession that Americans, companies, and Americans in general seem to have with multitasking. There are a lot of occupations where you can't multitask or it's going to cause an absolute disaster. As a matter of fact, the scientific research into multitasking, neuroscience has determined that it is impossible for the human brain to multitask effectively. I've looked into the research and there's no doubt about it. Multitasking, which is a term that originated in computer science, is not natural for the human mind. As a matter of fact, the title of one article I read on the subject was "How Multitasking Makes You Dumb," because the brain is trying to focus on too many things at one time. And the reason that we have so many customer service issues, one of the biggest reasons that we have mediocre service in so many businesses in the United States is this whole issue of multitasking. You know, there are a lot of occupations where multitasking can get you in some serious trouble. Did you know that commercial airline pilots, for example, did you know that when they taxi out to the runway, from the time they leave the gate until the time they reach altitude, there's no talking allowed in the cockpit? There's no idle chit-chat because they have to be completely focused on the task at hand, flying that plane, because if they're not, the consequences can be extremely serious. You can get a lot of people killed that way. So there is no talking in the cockpit of a commercial airliner until they reach altitude, and at that point computers can begin to take over and perform some of the functions, and conversation can start. But takeoffs and landings are the most dangerous parts of flying generally, so there's no talking allowed, no idle chit-chat, except for things that are absolutely necessary. Now think of a truck driver. You drive a truck down the highway, you're doing several things at once, but it's still about driving the truck. You are looking ahead 12 to 15 seconds, checking the mirror, both sides every few seconds, upshifting, downshifting, double clutching. And so in a sense you're doing several things, but you're focused on one thing, driving the truck. And if you lose your focus, it only takes a couple of seconds to travel the length of a football field or more. And that's why it's illegal to drive a truck and talk on the phone or text at the same time, because it's extremely dangerous. Driving a 53-foot, 26,000-pound bomb, that's no joke. You have to be completely focused on that job. If you're not, the consequences can be disastrous. And this is how serious it can be. If you take an exit ramp in a tractor trailer, go off the exit ramp and travel the speed limit, the posted speed limit, that's actually too fast, because it'd be real easy to flip that trailer, and a lot of people do. And it's as simple as going about 5 miles per hour too fast. To avoid accidents in a tractor trailer, you've got to pay attention to what you're doing. You have to be totally focused on driving that truck. You can't be talking on the phone, can't be sending text messages. Distracted truck drivers get in extremely serious accidents. The same thing can happen to distracted train engineers. There's a lot to driving a train, because speeds have to change depending on curves in the tracks, or hills, or valleys, or changes in the landscape. It's a complicated operation. You have to be focused on it. You can't be talking on the phone, texting, checking emails, or anything like that while running a train. Now think of a musician, a piano player, for example. Piano player, one who plays by reading music, that is. You are reading music, doing sight reading, playing the treble clef and the bass clef, and possibly operating some foot pedals, and that's the extent pretty much of what you can do. You cannot play a musical instrument effectively and do something else at the same time. You just can't do it. That's beyond human capacity to do that thing. So when you see an orchestra playing or a band play, the musicians are doing one thing and one thing only. They might also be singing, but that's kind of complementary. That's not something that conflicts with what they're already doing. To be a good musician, you have to focus on one thing. To practice as a musician, you have to focus on one thing. Orchestra leader, same thing. Orchestra leader can't do anything but lead that orchestra. That's all it can do. Try to do something else, the orchestra is going to sound like crap, to put it bluntly. Doctors and dentists. Would you like to have a procedure done by a multitasking doctor or multitasking dentist? Now, I don't think that they actually do that, because it's pretty much impossible to conduct a surgical operation or to pull or drill teeth and do something else at the same time. That's pretty much impossible, but the pressure that is applied to clerical personnel to do more than one thing, that can cause some serious errors. And maybe one of these days somebody may find out that a lot of medical errors are the result of clerical errors, and the clerical errors are the result of multitasking. That would not surprise me at all. Writers. I write some articles for publications from time to time, and got very good grades on research papers and reports in college and university. But when writing a manuscript of any kind, you have to concentrate totally on the task at hand, because if I don't, I'm going to end up with a lousy manuscript. It's just that simple. To get good results from writing, you do one thing. You do one thing at a time. And you may interrupt your writing to take a phone call or send an email or something like that, but you're not typing the manuscript on your keyboard while you're talking on the telephone. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. You can't possibly come up with a good work product that way. Film editors. It's very precise work. You have to watch everything you're doing, keep your focus totally on the one task in order to edit film. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a lousy product. Public speakers. You can basically only do one thing when you deliver a speech, and this applies to people who speak in public, television presenters, All they can do is basically read from that teleprompter if they're doing a newscast. A clergyman, all he can do is focus on the sermon. You know what? You know one thing that messes up people who give public speeches a lot? The PowerPoint. Because they get trapped into this script, and all you can do is run through this PowerPoint and sort of follow the script and maybe add a couple of comments. But I've done it before. It's very limiting. To be a good speaker, you need to just be able to speak. I mean, it's that simple. Carpenters. You can't be a decent carpenter and multitask. To get that task done, you have to focus on it. Plumbers. How can you do plumbing and multitask? It's one thing at a time. And you know why you can't drink and drive? Why you shouldn't drink and drive? Think about it just a minute. Drinking and driving is multitasking because the brain, the central nervous system, is being depressed at the same time you're trying to do this complicated operation of driving when the entire focus needs to be on the driving. Drinking and driving is multitasking, so is swimming and drinking. That's why you're told very often, don't swim and drink. Because the brain, the central nervous system is being depressed at the same time you're trying to perform this operation, and it doesn't work well, and people drown a lot that way. Now, you know, Michael Phelps, he got caught for drunk driving a couple of times, but he never called into a competition and said, I can't swim, I've been drinking today. No, he had better sense to do that because he knew he couldn't possibly swim in a competition after drinking, because that, my friend, is multitasking. So what does the research say about multitasking? The research says almost unanimously that the inevitable conclusion that has been reached is that the human brain cannot multitask effectively. The human mind was not designed for multitasking. When we multitask, we commit all sorts of errors in the task at hand. And the reason multitasking survives in American society is because we're all too willing to allow for mediocrity. Because work products of all kinds absolutely do suffer as a result of multitasking. And people who claim to multitask effectively, what they're actually doing is switching back and forth between tasks. They're not doing a lot of different things simultaneously at the same minute, at the same second. They actually are switching back and forth. So I've given you several examples of occupations in which the primary task, multitasking, just won't work because it'll create a lousy product and it will damage the work. And it does that just about every time. And the research into multitasking, the research that the neuroscientists have conducted into multitasking, seems to be, the universal message seems to be that the human brain is not designed to multitask. So, if in the U.S. workforce, the U.S. business community, we ever rid ourselves of this ridiculous idea, this ridiculous expectation of multitasking, it'll be a great leap forward. And I, for one, say Godspeed that day. Have a great day.